It's only fitting that the fourth E.G.O of Rodion's that we cover is Rodion's fourth Match Flames. So let's get into it. Rodion's fourth Match Flame is a He level E.G.O. It is attack weight of 3 and has a 38 base with a negative 18 coin. Now, this is quite interesting because this is the first E.G.O that we covered that had a negative coin at base. It's somewhat unfortunate because Rodion doesn't have any IDs that have negative coins, but we'll get one eventually. And on hit, you will inflict 6 burn. On hit, you will inflict 3 Wrath Agility next turn. If you're wondering what Wrath Agility does, pretty much it takes the potency times 10%, and you deal that much extra damage when using a Wrath skill to the enemy who has the Wrath Fragility. So pretty much more damage while using Wrath skills. The Wrath talk doesn't stop there because the passive Spark of Flames, after defeating an enemy that has burn, heal HP by Wrath Absolute Resonance times percent of max HP. So you'll be healing by your maximum HP multiplied by the percent of Wrath Absolute Resonance, which is interesting because this E.G.O allows you to heal, which is fairly good of a passive, all things considered. So you thought Talk About Wrath was done with the damage type, the passive. No, it costs 3 Wrath, 2 Pride, and 1 Envy, costs you 20 Sanity too, as most He's will. Well, not most, all. But you think we're done now? No, we're not, because you're ineffective to Wrath. But you're fatal to Sloth and fatal to Gloom. You're also endured to Envy. Now, on Corrosion, you will actually lose some power, but you will gain 2 attack weight, which will bring you up to a total of 5 attack weight and a 33 roll with a negative 18 coin, which is not the best. It could be better, like in its not corroded form, but inflicting 6 burn and 3 Wrath Fragility next turn, that is the exact same as the non-corroded. Alright. Usually, I would just go into rating the E.G.O after explaining what it does, what it can do, but I cannot miss out on this opportunity to talk on the perfect ID to use, because this ID synergizes with the E.G.O just too well. Liu Rodion fuels the E.G.O fairly well, with skill 1 being Pride, which fuels it, and skill 2 being Wrath, that fuels it, and if you're running a solo, the Wrath, you'll probably be able to resonance it, right? So you'll be able to use its passive to its fullest extent, while also fueling it fairly well. And drip does this E.G.O have? Oh my goodness. I like the base, and I like the corrosion. Now, there's not too much I can say because it's not too crazy of a design. I like the fire, I like the colors, I like the dress. Fairly simple, but fairly good. I rate that as solid 8, maybe, no, 8's pretty good because it's pretty good design. So at 8 for the drip. Now, for the strength of this E.G.O, it's able to do quite a bit of damage, especially if you use it and then use it again, which you'll pretty likely do it tails, actually, which makes sense why it wants to be a negative. That makes sense, because you'll use it, inflict the Wrath Fragility next turn you'll use it, and you'll have not that much sanity, right? So, you might roll tails. That makes it actually pretty good. And the corrosion is the same thing, but worse, which is kind of understandable. If you're corrode, you're most likely going to roll tails on a Teth E.G.O, or a He E.G.O, I mean. So, that makes sense. I suppose I'll cough up a whopping 7.5, I suppose. It's not a great, not the strongest E.G.O, but it can hold its own, and it can do a bunch of damage while synergizing with other Wrath E.G.Os, or Wrath IDs. At first glance, this E.G.O doesn't look too out of the ordinary, doesn't look too useful, but with its passive being able to heal you, and you being able to inflict 3 Wrath Fragility next turn, makes this a fairly useful E.G.O, especially if you're running a team that is suited around this ego. For example, wrath or burn. If you're doing that, then this will become a very good ego. So the usefulness of this ego, I would rate it a whopping 8. Because it's not going to game changer, right? It's not going to change the way you play. But if you use it, it's going to make it very, very useful to you. All in all, this is a very, very useful ego, and a pretty good ego to top it off. But it gets overlooked and overshadowed by Rodion's other he ego, which is a very, very good ego. But we'll be covering that in the next episode. So until then, have a good one.